Ancient site ruins can be popular tourist destinations as well as central places in creative writing, artwork, and fantasy world building. Unfortunately, basic errors and unrealistic portrayals can spoil the experience of appreciating an ancient site, whether in fact or in fiction. This video presents 5 simple questions that anyone can ask toward understanding the facts about an ancient site. The same 5 questions can help to guide a creative writer or artist toward a more authentic or convincing representation. Question number 1. How old is it? At the initial stage, I want to know a rudimentary timeline about when a site first was created and then what other time periods may have followed next. Was the site created a few hundreds of years ago, a few thousands of years ago, or some tens of thousands of years ago? Did people use this site only for a short time, or did successive generations use the site throughout an extended period or multiple different periods? After establishing the basic timeline, then I can consider what happened during each relevant time period at this particular location as well as in the larger surrounding region. Did the original timing coincide with an ancient ice age, and then did people later adjust to different conditions? Could the various site components be described as reflecting a Stone Age, Bronze Age, Iron Age, or another context? I do not need to know all of the details right away. The most relevant information will emerge as I proceed through the next of my 5 simple questions. Question number 2. How did people live here? When I ask this question, then I focus on 3 essential components. How did people obtain their food and water supply, create their shelter, and manage their waste disposal? These 3 practical concerns apply for every group living at every site, regardless of the time period or the associated context. You probably have seen incredibly detailed historical reconstructions or fantasy settings that are inconsistent with or contradicted by the fundamental practicalities. Many people in both academia and creative fictional work make the mistake of jumping ahead to the issues about political intrigue, storytelling drama, and various hypothetical notions without the groundwork of the supporting practical aspects. I like to start with acknowledging what daily life may have looked like. Depending on how the story takes shape, whether as a scientific presentation or as a fictional narrative, the details can be shared to the extent that they are relevant. I apply this approach for each time period of a site. I am especially interested to know how people at certain points in time may have changed their ways of satisfying their basic living needs. Maybe the previous ways of life became unsustainable, or maybe people developed more efficient or effective approaches. In any case, I want to know how those changing circumstances may be reflected in the different layers or components of an ancient site ruin. Question number 3. What were the supplemental resources? Beyond the basic practicalities, what additional raw materials and natural resources did people obtain from their surroundings? Furthermore, what creative products did people generate internally or access externally through trade contacts and networks? These aspects are not always obvious within the material archaeological record of a single site ruin by itself. Instead, these elements become more noticeable when considering the larger surrounding landscape or social context. For instance, a Bronze Age site would imply that people accessed copper and tin as the raw materials for making bronze, yet only a larger view of the surrounding landscape could reveal the relevant mines or quarries that acted as the potential control points and influenced the paths of trade routes. Conflicts can arise when one group attempts to assert control over the neighboring resources or over the neighboring populations who manage those resources. This perspective can help toward understanding the tensions within and between communities during any time period, and especially during a critical turning point of a transition from one period to the next. You could imagine how the geopolitical landscape changed from a Bronze Age to an Iron Age. Many Bronze Age sites were abandoned because people no longer needed to rely on the limited resources of copper and tin, and instead, people during an Iron Age could find acceptable sources of iron abundantly in some regions, but not in others. Similar logic applies in situations of technological change involving different raw materials for building basic tools and houses, new weapons, and fortifications that could withstand those new weapons. Question number 4. What parts were modified? Most ancient site ruins show the remnants of at least a few different construction episodes or layers of occupation. I like to visualize how a site developed in chronological order, of the initial construction, followed by the possibilities of modifications in the parts that may have been destroyed, restructured, or added. In many ancient sites, the most vulnerable portions or the major points of forced entry likely were damaged or destroyed during battles. Some parts may have been reconstructed later or created as entirely new additions or expansions, often using different raw materials and architectural design. In many cases, the original design of a site became obsolete or insufficient to continue, no longer effective after some time of significant technological change or population growth. Defensive walls and ditches through time would need to be expanded, thickened, or heightened in order to cope with extended range of weapons, force of impact, and varieties of siege engines. A small hilltop or narrow ridgetop may have been suitable as a defensive position for a small community of a few hundreds of people, but later it would be ineffective for defending a larger group of some thousands of people. Question number 5. What parts have survived or not? After a site was abandoned or restructured, then what parts of the original materials may have survived in variable conditions of intact, decayed, or disappeared? Most ancient site ruins have decayed gradually through extended periods of time. Perhaps people attempted to reoccupy or repurpose the ruins, but eventually the older portions decayed into the ancient ruins that we can see today. Typically, ancient site ruins consist of only the most durable raw materials, such as pieces of stonework, while everything else has degraded or transformed. Cloth or other textiles, as well as wood and thatch components, disappear quickly from an ancient site, especially when they are exposed to ongoing weathering. If a roof has collapsed or burned, then even the interior of a building can be exposed. Unprotected woodwork and textiles will decay after just a short time. The strongest wood constructions may last a little bit longer in doors, windows, bridges, and palisades. Nonetheless, most of these features will have degraded significantly or else vanished entirely by the time when people later visit the place as an ancient site ruin. Pieces of iron could persist for a long time, but inevitably they would corrode and lose their strength. If the ordinarily perishable materials have survived, then something extraordinary must have happened about maintaining a stable and preserving environment. Otherwise, finding intact textiles or woodwork or uncorroded ironwork can signify either a recent abandonment or else a continuing use and maintenance of the site. Most ancient ruins reveal portions that have fallen, collapsed, or degraded to varying degrees. The variability never is completely random, but instead it reflects the differential patterns of what parts of the site were exposed or subjected to rainfall or other weathering, tree roots and plant growth, or periodic fires or other environmental hazards. In cases of warfare, the defensive features likely were damaged deliberately, and the statues, artworks, and symbols of power likely were destroyed or stolen. Generally speaking, ancient site ruins show the remnants of the most durable components, such as the stonework constructions, masked by layers of dust and rubble, decayed organic matter and sediments, and overgrowth by trees and plants. A closer examination of the decayed remnants could reveal the patterns in what happened during and after the time of the site abandonment, This information can be helpful for understanding the scope of the archaeological evidence that happened to survive, as well as for enabling an investigation in a fictional narrative. Would you like to see more videos about applying archaeology toward understanding or representing ancient site ruins? Please share your ideas and suggestions in the comment section. As always, thank you for watching. I will see you in the next video.